There is a particular kind of loneliness that exists in airport terminals on Christmas Eve. It is not the ordinary loneliness of travel, the mild solitude of strangers passing through a shared space toward different destinations. It is something heavier, made sharper by the holiday itself, by the families clustered near departure boards, by the soft chaos of children too excited to sit still, by the overhead announcements wishing everyone indiscriminately a safe journey home to the people who love them. It was in the middle of exactly that kind of loneliness, in a row of black vinyl seats near Gate 14, that a 7-year-old girl named Daisy Renfrew turned to a stranger sitting beside her and said something so direct, so entirely unguarded, that it would alter the course of his life. "You look like someone who needs a family, too," she said. The man she said it to was named Gabriel Ashworth. He was 39 years old, dressed in a sharply tailored navy suit, a single black leather glove pulled over his right hand. The result, though Daisy could not have known this, of a car accident 18 months earlier that had taken his wife's life and left him with permanent nerve damage and considerable scarring across his hand and forearm. Damage he had spent a year and a half carefully, deliberately concealing from almost everyone in his life. He was the founder and chief executive of Ashworth Renewable Systems, a clean energy infrastructure company he had built into one of the most significant players in its sector over the past decade. He was, by every external measure, an enormously successful man. He was also, on this particular Christmas Eve, flying home alone to an enormous, empty house in Vermont, having spent the holiday handling a business matter in the city, specifically because the alternative spending it in, that house surrounded by all the ornaments his late wife Eleanor had collected over the years, with no one there to share the quiet, had felt unbearable. He had not expected, sitting in a row of airport seats waiting for a delayed flight, to be addressed at all, let alone so plainly. He turned to look at the girl who had spoken, small, red-cheeked from the cold outside, wearing a pink knit cap with a pom-pom on top, clutching a worn teddy bear with a small red ribbon around its neck. "I'm sorry," he said. "You look like someone who needs a family." "Too," Daisy repeated, entirely unbothered by having to say it twice. With the particular patience of a child stating an observation she considers simply factual. "You're sitting all by yourself, and you keep looking at your hand like it makes you sad." Gabriel glanced down, startled, at his gloved hand resting on his knee, then quickly back at the girl, a flush of something between embarrassment and surprise moving across his face. "Daisy," came a voice from the woman seated on Daisy's other side, red-haired, perhaps 30, wearing a soft cream sweater, her expression carrying the particular mortified urgency of someone whose child has just said something unfiltered to a stranger. "Sweetheart, that's not something you say to people." "Why not?" Daisy asked. "It's true. He does look sad." The woman turned to Gabriel with an apologetic wince. "I'm so sorry. She doesn't have much of a filter these days." "I'm Renfrew. This is my daughter, Daisy." "It's quite all right," Gabriel said, and found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he meant it. "She's not wrong. Actually, I have been having a difficult day." Rin studied him for a moment, not with pity, which he had learned to recognize and quietly resent over the past 18 months, but with something closer to simple, attentive curiosity. "Delayed flight?" she asked. "Or something more than that?" "Both, I suppose," Gabriel said, though the flight delay is considerably easier to talk about. Daisy, apparently satisfied that the adults were now properly engaged in conversation, climbed slightly closer on the connected airport seating and looked at Gabriel's gloved hand with open, unembarrassed curiosity. "Does your hand hurt?" she asked. "Daisy," Rin started again. "It's fine," Gabriel said gently, holding up his unloved left hand in a small gesture of reassurance toward Rin. "I don't mind the question." He looked at Daisy. "It had hurt for a long time. It's better now mostly, but it doesn't look the way it used to, and I've gotten used to covering it up instead of letting people see it." "Why?" Daisy asked. "Is it ugly?" Daisy, that's enough, Rin said, mortification deepening considerably. But Gabriel found himself unexpectedly almost laughing. The first real laugh he had managed in longer than he wanted to admit. It's all right, he said again. It's an honest question. He considered it seriously. I think I've been afraid people would think it was ugly, yes. There was an accident. My wife passed away in it. My hand was hurt pretty badly. I think some part of me decided, somewhere along the way, that hiding it was easier than explaining all of that to people who didn't really need to know. Daisy was quiet for a moment, processing this with the particular seriousness children bring to genuinely difficult information. My daddy died too, she said. Last year, in the springtime. Gabriel felt something tighten in his chest. I'm very sorry to hear that, he said softly. It's okay to be sad about it, Daisy said, with the rehearsed cadence of a phrase she had clearly heard often enough to absorb fully into her own vocabulary. But it's also okay to not be sad all the time. Mommy says both things can be true. Gabriel looked at Run, who was watching her daughter with an expression of complicated tenderness. Grief and pride and exhaustion all tangled together in a single glance. Your mommy sounds very wise, Gabriel said. She is, Daisy confirmed. She's the smartest person I know. Ren offered him a small, tired smile. We're flying to my sister's for Christmas, she said. It's our first one without my husband. I thought getting away from the house might make it easier. I'm not entirely sure that's turning out to be true. I understand that more than I'd like to, Gabriel said. I'm flying home to a very large, very empty house, specifically, because I couldn't bear to be in the city for Christmas without my wife. And I'm fairly certain, now that I'm actually doing it, that I've made exactly the wrong choice. Where's home? Ren asked. Vermont, Gabriel said. A house entirely too big for one person, full of ornaments my wife collected for years. I think I've been telling myself that going there is honoring her memory. I suspect it's actually just delaying having to feel the size of the house properly. Daisy, who had been listening to this adult exchange with great focus, tugged gently at her mother's sleeve and whispered something. Ren listened, then looked at Gabriel with an expression that was part amusement, part genuine consideration. Daisy would like to know, she said, relaying the message with the careful neutrality of someone who hadn't authored it. If you'd like to come to my sister's house for Christmas instead of going home to your empty one. She says nobody should be alone in a big sad house on Christmas. Gabriel stared at the two of them, momentarily speechless. I couldn't possibly impose on your sister's family on Christmas Eve, he said. We've known each other for perhaps 15 minutes. You've known each other for 15 minutes. And you've already told her more about your hand and your wife than you've told most people in 18 months. I'd guess, Rin said gently. My sister has plenty of room and far too much food every single year. And honestly, I think Daisy's right, even if she said it in the most direct way possible. Nobody should spend tonight alone in an empty house missing someone, with no one there to help carry it. Gabriel sat with the offer for a long moment, feeling something in his chest. Something that had been clenched tight for 18 months, loosened slightly. I don't want to intrude on your grief with mine, he said quietly. Tonight is about you and Daisy and your family. Grief shared is usually lighter than grief carried alone, Rin said. I think that's true whether it's mine or yours. And for what it's worth, my sister Colleen would absolutely insist on this if she were sitting here. She's never met a stray she didn't want to feed on a holiday. Daisy, watching this negotiation with evident satisfaction, decided to add her own final argument. You can take off your glove if you want, she said. Nobody at Aunt Colleen's house will think it's ugly. I promise. Gabriel changed his flight that evening. A small practical complication that the airline staff, themselves working a holiday shift, handled with unexpected grace, and boarded a different plane alongside Run and Daisy, toward his sister's house in a small town outside Burlington that he had never heard of, and had no real reason to expect to feel welcome in. He did, as it turned out, feel welcome. Overwhelmingly so, in the particular generous, slightly chaotic way of a large family Christmas that had clearly been refined over many years of practice. Colleen, Ren's sister, greeted him with no more surprise than she might have shown any other unexpected guest, simply adding another plate to an already crowded table and instructing him, within the first 10 minutes, exactly where the good blankets were kept if the house got cold later. He took off his gloves sometime around dessert quietly, without announcement, and no one at the table reacted with anything beyond ordinary, unbothered acceptance. A small mercy that struck him, in the moment, as larger than almost anything else that had happened to him in the past year and a half. What grew between Gabriel and Run in the months that followed did not arrive quickly or dramatically. Both of them were too deeply grieving for anything to move faster than careful, patient honesty allowed. But a friendship began that Christmas Eve that deepened steadily over the following year, built on a shared understanding of a particular kind of loss, on long conversations about Eleanor and about Ren's husband Patrick, on the slow, mutual relearning of how to be present in an ordinary life again after losing someone essential to it. Daisy remained, throughout all of it, the small, unfiltered architect of the entire connection, utterly unbothered by being credited with starting something significant, since in her own accounting she had simply noticed a sad man sitting alone, and decided plainly that this seemed like an easy thing to fix. Gabriel, in the years that followed, kept his glove off far more often than he kept it on, having learned on an ordinary Christmas Eve in an airport terminal that the things we work hardest to hide are sometimes simply waiting for someone honest enough to ask about them directly. He would tell the story often in later years, ending it the same way every time. The 7-year-old looked at me for 30 seconds, he would say, and said the one true thing every adult around me had been too polite to mention for a year and a half. I needed a family, too. I just hadn't let myself say it out loud until she did. And perhaps that is the gentle truth tucked inside a Christmas Eve like this one, that children often speak the plain truths grief teaches the rest of us to bury beneath careful composure. We spend so much energy hiding our hardest losses behind gloves and empty houses and polite deflection. Sometimes it takes someone small and entirely unguarded to remind us that the bravest thing we can do is simply let someone see